Then one boy was there on the beach, and I run over and I see he has blue lips and blue fingertips, and his toes are blue. And so then, then I call for the boatman, to come back. So then we rush him, into the boat, rowing him across. I'm holding him, splashing water on his face, and then he dies. But what happened was, it turned out that he was the youngest child of, I think, 6, 7. The mother had recently become widowed, and she couldn't afford to feed all of her children, so she poisoned the youngest one. So then I thought that maybe, there was something I could have done had I had the proper training or knew anything. So then I said, you know what, maybe this is a sign that I should become a doctor. Totally abused this freedom. I failed all of my courses the first semester. My first GPA for the first semester was 0.7. So then I met with my guidance counselor, and she said to me, she's like, what are you doing? She's like, you really have to work to do this poorly. So we traveled around the country, and then I sort of discovered India for myself.
Hi, this is Dr. Priya and I welcome you to yet another episode of Her Health Talks. Her Health Talks is an initiative which we have taken to curate the best conversations possible with the best people possible. Today I have with me Dr. Vishwa Srivastava. Dr. Srivastava is a man who wears many hats. He is an anthropologist, a yogi, an avid biker, a mountain climber. He is also the COO and president of SS Innovations. SS Innovations is a company that has spearheaded the development of the first indigenous Indian surgical robot called SSI Mantra. SSI Mantra is revolutionizing the surgical scene in India and the world quietly. So now, let's talk to Dr. Vishwa Srivastava, find out more about him as a person, find out more about the journey of SS Innovations, and to find out what he thinks is going to be the future of surgery. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And there are a lot of things that I'm really interested to talk to you about and to ask you.
Okay.
But let's go back to where it all began.
Sure.
So, from what you told me, you did not train in medicine right from the beginning.
No.
And you came into medicine much later. So what was this story about? Tell us about your childhood, growing up as a diaspora kid in the US in the 90s.
So, as you and many of the viewers in the audience might, remember, so in the 1970s, many of the Indians who are today, and they've brought up and raised families, in the US and Canada, they all left India on these lottery visas. So it was kind of like, the cream of the crop, and even amongst them, like the top 1%, they were all given these visas. And these visas were granted by these Western nations to help these nations raise their GDP, raise their skill set, raise the acumen of the professionals, to populate. And this is when, there's no coincidence that today, 70 to 80% of all hospitals are filled with either Indians, Pakistanis, or Bangladeshis.
Right.
Okay, so I was born in Vancouver, British Columbia. My parents, they met in St. Louis. Dad decided to come to Canada because he was originally training as a urologist. He doesn't tell many people this. It was only by circumstance or design or destiny that he came into cardiac surgery. And he always wanted to be a cardiac surgeon. So in Vancouver, that's where I was born. My sister was born on the complete opposite side of the country in Newfoundland, which is in the eastern maritime provinces. We immigrated to the United States in 1981 because my mother, who's from the Philippines, her uncle was a surgeon in the Air Force. So he sponsored us to come over. We drove from Newfoundland all the way to San Antonio, Texas, which is very far. And we drove through blizzards, I remember. And it was very interesting at that time. So, they say that when you're a child, you can't remember your early years. Well, I remember when we were in Newfoundland, because I was approximately 4 years old at the time. I remember being very cold, lots of snow, icebergs. And my parents would oftentimes, they were doing, not residency, but they were working as physicians in a very remote part of Canada. I remember that they would come home with lobsters and fish, and this is how their patients paid them. You know? So I grew up, in Texas, and very interestingly, there were more like me. So within every city in the United States, due to this Indian diaspora that had migrated west, there was always sort of a community of Indians, whether how small or large. And that's, as you know, Indians will always gravitate towards another. So then we'd have our functions. And then all of a sudden I'd have many uncles and aunties and, people my own age that, your parents would play with, And for them, now looking back at it, it was extremely brave, what they did, sort of leaving everything behind to venture into this unknown promise of this land of opportunity, that's classically seen was America and even Canada. And they had no idea what they were doing. See, as children, we often forget that before our parents were parents, they were just normal people, right? They had
Even as their parents, they're normal people.
Right, exactly. But it's we never give them enough credit, I think, and we're always, it's only once we become older that we recognize. But as you can imagine, the job of the parent is to guide the child what to do with their life. So of course, both my parents being doctors, obviously the children have to become doctors. So, and there's always this conflict that, well, I don't want to do it. And there's always this rebellion. I think in the West, due to the fact that in our home, our behavior was one way, and then outside we had to assimilate. And then that often meant you had to, at least in those days, before the internet, if you can imagine, where people had to figure things out, without asking Google.
Yeah.
How to behave on the outside, to be accepted, because we're still outsiders in the United States. We're still foreigners, everyone wants to make friends. Everyone wants to be cool in high school.
Basically.
Accepted,
Yeah.
right? And there was always this identity conflict. And there's a film that came out long back called The Namesake with Kal Penn. And I felt that was an exact carbon copy of not only my life, but I'm sure many other people shared that similar experience. So basically, long story short, the last thing I wanted to do was become a doctor. So once I graduated from high school, I looked at all universities which are as far away from my parents that I could find. So we were living in Texas, so it's kind of in the middle of the country. So either I could go to Maine, which is on the east, and to the north, where there's nothing, or I could go to Seattle, Washington. Now, luckily for me, in high school, I used to play in these rock bands. Grunge music was a big thing. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all this. So I found this university, I applied, and I got in. And it was, emotional. Now I'm leaving home for the first time and, get these very encouraging and pep talks, from my mother and father that you'll do great, whatever, and with God's grace, this and that, it's in your destiny. So taking that, I go to my university, newfound freedom, totally abused this freedom. I failed all of my courses the first semester. So normally in the US, we have a 4.0 scale. So 4 being the highest, 0 meaning that you don't waste your time. My first GPA for the first semester was 0.7. So then I met with my guidance counselor, and she said to me, she's like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "You really have to work to do this poorly. Most people, when they fail, they'll fail, but you failed magnificently, So then I went home. I had to deal with, now finding the courage, right? So just as my parents were brave when they left, I was brave leaving college to come home to tell them how and why I decided to ruin my life academically. I told my mom, immediately tears started falling. I told my dad, that was one of the hardest things I've had to do in my life. So he basically said, all right, you have a choice. Either you score above a 3.5, which is, like an A, GPA next semester. And if you don't, we're going to pull you back here to Texas and you're going to go to community college and you will probably not amount to anything in your life, So I did very well the next semester. I think a 3.9, just to prove to them and myself that I wasn't a complete idiot, that I had something working up here. But I was just doing all these traditional pre-med courses, and I wasn't into it. I studied calculus, chemistry, Latin, biostatistics, and I wasn't enjoying it, even though I could still make some marks in it. And then I ended up dropping out of school because I thought, why am I staying in school when I don't understand why I don't enjoy what I'm doing? So I drove from Seattle, Washington. I was going to drive to Colorado to hopefully disappear into the Rocky Mountains and never be heard from again. So I decided to call my mom. I was in Montana, and I called her early in the morning. I told her what I had done. And my poor mother, I always tell her these things first, right? And then my dad only hears it from her. And of course, she started crying. So now, for all of you viewers, I promise I'm a decent human being. I'm not horrible, to my parents, but I'm very honest. And then I got a call from Dad. I was in New Mexico, just doing some volunteer work, and I called him and I said, he's like, "What are you doing with your life?" I said, "I have no idea." And then he suggested to me, he said, "Well, if you want, you can go to India and go to the ashram where myself and sister and family grew up going in South India." And he said, "Maybe you'll find the answer there. Maybe you'll get some guidance." So I went, and this is the first time I went to India by myself. So my friend and I, we traveled to India. We stayed in this ashram in South India. It was the SSI Baba ashram in Puttaparthi. Then following that, we traveled around the country like backpackers. I didn't speak Hindi at the time. All I knew about India prior to that, was going to my family's home in Jodhpur, sitting there in this, under the fan because it's so hot outside, very hot, and resenting my parents for taking me there during my school holidays, right? So we traveled around the country, and then I sort of discovered India for myself. Then my friend who I was traveling with, he contracted malaria, so now I had to evacuate him out of the country back to Seattle. So prior to leaving, I was staying at my uncle's house, who now lives in Kolkata, but he was in Jaipur. And he said, "Boy, come here." So my uncle, little backstory, he's a big rough and tough. He's younger than my father. I think his next youngest brother. He's in the Navy, a very Navy-esque type person, rough and tough. And he called me over and he said, "Boy, come here." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I want you to make me a promise." I said, "Yes, uncle, what is it?" And he said, "When you go back to your university, learn your father's language so that when you come back to India, you'll discover an entirely new country." And I did. I kept the promise. I went back, fueled by traveling around India by myself, observing my own interpretation of what India was to me. Then I went back to the university. I decided to become a international studies scholar with a focus on anthropology in South Asia. In the curriculum, they made us study everything about the region. So I studied the history, religion, language, ancient languages, politics, music, everything about India. And not India, but South Asia.
Right.
Then I found myself that this opportunity came where then I could study in India for at least a year. So I got in. It was a program in Varanasi at BHU. I left the US. I moved to Banaras. And this was in the fall of 1999. There was one internet station in Banaras at the time. It was still remember the days where you had the STD, ISD phones.
And the dial in
the
internet.
Dial. Yeah. And I moved to, I was living in the gullies by the main ghat, the Shashwamedh Ghat. And then the monsoon came, and now it's raining. And my first month, walking through the gullies, it's up to your knees in water. God knows, getting what infections, this and that. And my first month in Varanasi, I cried every night, away from home, and I was like, what have I done, So then I decided to move to Assi Ghat, which is the last ghat next to BHU. Yeah. That was very close. Found a decent flat, was living there. And then I began to find my way. It's like, actually, there's a funny backstory. So when I was coming with a group of students from the United States, so there were 3 students who were of Indian origin. There was myself, there was Manish, who was Punjabi, and there was Monica, who who's also Punjabi. But everyone learned Hindi, in the American universities. So then we get on the bus, right? So everyone's looking to us to interpret. So then the bus drivers were full. I think they were full Punjabi. So and then when their speaking is in Punjabi, and then everyone's asking, what do they say? And I thought that we forgot all of our Hindi.
All of our Hindi.
Because we couldn't understand a word they were saying, now having to navigate to the hotel. So luckily we moved to Varanasi where, Shuddh Hindi is still somewhat spoken. And then I began to, carve my life out there. The lovely thing, and then slowly over time, Varanasi became my most favorite place on earth. It's like this microcosmos of time and everybody in India and birth and learning and dying and everything. So Banaras will always be very special to me. And so what happened there, so there's a group of street kids, right? And I was going to my classes. I was studying Hindi literature and Hindi and Sanskrit and Bansuri. And I loved doing all that every single day. So we used to sit on the ghats after, class every day, just having tea and watching, the sun go down. And there's a group of street children living in the neighborhood, just selling postcards and pens, and brilliant children. They all spoke 5, 6 different languages, from Japanese to Hebrew to Italian to French, English, whatever. But none of them went to school. And so one day, I asked one of their parents, I was like, how come they don't go to school? It was like, we try, but they won't do it. So then my friend Manish and I, we went to where they all lived, and we threw water on them in the morning to get them and threw them into the buggy to take them to school. So what happened is that they'd get to school, they're all very smart, and then they would leave. So then I decided, okay, I have to incentivize them. So I made a deal with them, because in India you have school 6 days a week, right? And I think it's half day Wednesday, half day Saturday. So I said, of the 6 days, if you go 5 days a week, have your teacher sign off on all of you. Then on Saturday afternoon or Sunday, we'll spar, like across the river, and we'll have a picnic. That works. Then now all the kids are going to school. All the parents in the neighborhood in Nasighat are happy. And it was going brilliant for like 6, 7 months. Then Holi comes, and so we went across, the river to play colors. Then one boy was there on the beach, and I run over and I see he has blue lips and blue fingertips, and his toes were blue. And so then, then I call for the boatman, to come back. So then we rush him, into the boat, rowing him across. I'm holding him, splashing water on his face. And then he dies, right? So, and I'm 19 years old, and we get back to the other side. Obviously, the cops are there. They pull all of us in for questioning. My uncle from Kolkata comes, demanding a toxicology report and this and that. So what happened was, it turned out that he was the youngest child of, I think, 6, 7. The mother had recently become widowed, and she couldn't afford to feed all of her children, so she poisoned the youngest one. And I tell you, after that, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't concentrate. Luckily, I just finished my program. I went to Nepal, into the mountains, and for 3 months, and I was just climbing mountains and trying to find silence, but it was always in my head. So then I thought that maybe, there was something I could have done had I had the proper training or knew anything. So then I said, you know what, maybe this is a sign that I should become a doctor. So I applied to what we have in the US, it's called post-baccalaureate pre-med. So it means you've already finished your undergraduate requirements, but it's an accelerated program where you do all of the pre-med in 2 years. There was one program I found, it was pretty hard to get into. It was in Columbia University in New York. I applied there. I got in. Then I moved to New York. And 2 months after I moved to New York, 9/11 happened. Oh. So I just can't get a break, right? So now the world is literally falling around me, falling apart around me. I'm trying to learn, at least get through this pre-medical education, which I did, and then New York ended up stabilizing. But then, having been through that and done that, I took the MCAT, all that. I just felt like, there's something I want to pursue further. So then I reapplied for my master's in anthropology. I came to India, studied on the mystical aspects of Hinduism, Buddhism, and some aspects of Islam, like Sufism. Of the 54 Shakti peeths in the country, I think I traveled to 36. So I focused on mainly goddess worship and tantra and different forms of Shaivism, worship of Lord Shiva. And I got to see the whole country, north, south, east, west, and spent about a year doing that. Then I go back to the US. After I finished, I realized that there's no money in being an academic as an anthropologist, unless you stay in academia, then you have to publish. And so I kind of teamed up with my father at the time. He was just transitioning from his station at the University of Chicago to this hospital in Atlanta to start a teaching program. And because of when I was an anthropologist, I was making a lot of videos and editing and this and that. He asked me to help him create a teaching website that would teach conventional heart surgeons how to become minimally invasive and robotic heart surgeons. So we started an organization called the International College of Robotic Surgery, and I used whatever I could contribute. So that was basically from a digital media point of view. And I helped him create these didactic training modules where surgeons would use in order to learn about cardiac surgery, and they'd have tests and videos and things like that. Then in 2010, I believe he was recruited to India by the Fortis, the hospital group. And I believe he must have told you this story. And so we came, the whole entire family came. And it turns out it was more challenging, than it seemed, imagining. Everything we were promised didn't happen. I think these Ranbaxy brothers went to jail or something shortly after our arrival. Everything that we were promised didn't get delivered on. And so he bought the robotic system himself. And so even though we trained people, and by this time I was training people on the robotic system, because he was obviously operating too. And, for me, it wasn't, I'm of the video game generation. So learning how to manipulate a robotic system wasn't that difficult, although I wasn't a doctor. So we trained everybody. We had surgeons come from all over the world, trained the local Indian teams, and everyone was ready. But then they couldn't get the patients because of the cost. Right? The cost is very high. And so now what to do? It's like training, to climb a mountain, but not having, you can't afford to buy a ticket to get to the mountain. Yeah. You know what I mean? So what do you do with that? So this has actually turned out to be, a shared experience. Now, since I've come back to India, you have many people like yourselves. I'm sure you might have had exposure, to robotics, in your training, professional training. But then for what? Unless you have it, then you don't become good. If you can't become good, no one will seek your help. Right? So at that time, 2010, my dad he was launching a program, I believe, in Korea, in South Korea. And basically a nurse put the knife right through the heart. See, the reason why that happened was in the platform at the time, which was the only, robotic system, the surgeon could see in 3D, but everyone else they saw in 2D. So basically it would be like if you're operating in an open procedure, but you had to do it with one eye covered. Yeah. Right? So
no depth perception.
None. Right? So in the chest, as you know, it's very small. So basically she put the knife right through the heart. He fixed it. But then after the case, he asked, what happened? And she said, I couldn't tell how deep I was going. So then he asked me, he was like, I wish that they could see what I see. So then I told him, I said, well, based on my limited understanding of video and connectivity, I said, well, all they are 3D signals. There should be a way for you to manipulate them and bring onto these 3D monitors, which you can buy in Chroma, which are there. But the problem is that in the 3D that we, enjoy films and, cartoons on, that 3D, it comes out of the screen. Where surgery, it has to go into the screen. So it's the total opposite. Right? So he asked me, he's like, do you think you can do it? I said, yeah, just give me some money and give me some time. So I got some money. I flew to New York. I went to this place called B&H Photo, which is it's like the mecca for production, audio visual production. I spent 2 weeks there. I ordered lunch, for all the guys working there. We got a whiteboard, came up with a proof of concept. We bought 5 large electrical components. I somehow, I won't say smuggled, but I brought them back into the country. And we started experimenting for a whole proof of concept. And then once we, and it was like a big jugaad, like putting everything together. We were doing out of my dad's operating room, which was now converted into our laboratory. And finally, we arrived at a proof of concept. Vilayat, who you met earlier, helped me very closely in that. And then we were testing in his OT when he was now in Medanta. We realized that this whole robotic training project failed because no one could afford it.
Yeah.
He started practicing cardiac surgery in Medanta. Dr. Trehan's a good friend of his. So he was very gracious in inviting all of us over there. And then we kind of figured out a way after about 1.5 years of testing how to get rid of like this dizziness and tunnel vision and establish this 3D platform. So then I felt like there was nothing left for me to do here in India. Like I've done everything I could have done. Either I could just be this personal assistant to my father for the rest of my life or figure out what to do on my own. So I was chatting with a good friend of mine. She was a chef on a boat in the Caribbean, but living in Miami. So, and I started practicing more yoga at the time. So I'd go to like Dharamshala, do these teacher trainings or, courses. And then she said, you should just teach yoga in Miami. She's like, there are no Indians who are teaching yoga here. I said, really? And she said, yes. I was like, that's it, It reminded me of this film called The Guru. I don't know if you've seen it, where, he goes and he's just like a normal guy from India. And he goes to like Los Angeles. And now people, are meeting him at the airport with garlands. And like, full, like worshiping him. And so I go, in order to teach yoga in the United States, I had to do what's called a teacher training.
Teacher's training.
For like a certification. Although in India, there's no such things that exist. You go to some gurukul and you learn from a guru, and But I went, and it was interesting. So the way that my friend Emma had hyped it up, I thought I would reach Miami, go to the airport, there would be garlands, like pool mala, just waiting for me. And I went, and there was no one there, And then, but slowly, I started, and I had a motorbike that I bought, and that's how I got around. And I would just go to these studios, yoga studios, interviewing for jobs. So now I've come from like, anthropology to teaching websites for heart surgeons, helping build 3D vision, for robotic surgery. And now I'm teaching yoga in Miami. And out of all of the students, that I had, and I would always tell my students that I'm also a student. I'm no master by any means. I'm probably more messed up than half of you. But I was very heavy on, and it was important to me to let them understand sort of at least my interpretation of yoga. Then I was very much into philosophy and spirituality. It wasn't just so that everybody looks good in their designer jeans, this type of yoga. At that time, the 3D system that we had made had finally received its FDA registration and approval. I had it with me. So I was driving around the country to all these academic centers with this 3D vision platform, like a traveling salesman, and this was my life. I was teaching yoga and I was a traveling salesman. I might as well have been selling insurance or something, or like in the old days, you'd see like the vacuum cleaner or the Xerox machine, salesman. So that was me. So then one day my dad was in the car with me. We were driving from Miami to Chicago. We were stuck in this blizzard. And I was like, yep, this is my life again. And then I asked him, I was like, what would you think if I went to medical school? He said, you should go for it, And then we stopped at some like rest area, in the US. I got on my phone, which had the internet now, and I found a program. It was an accelerated program in the Caribbean. You do the first 2 years of medicine in 14 months. I applied, I got in, and that was it. I left. I went to med school in the Caribbean on this beautiful small island called Anguilla, which was part of it was a British colony. Then I left to Chicago. I went to Chicago, finished my medicine, only focusing in surgery. I had an amazing attending who was an orthopedic and trauma surgeon, a 7-foot Croatian who took me under his wing and really encouraged me, to focus on trauma. And I did. I spent a lot of time in trauma situations, Cook County Hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center, pulling bullets out of children who are gang members, and I'd see them repeatedly. And then the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. Then now what to do? I didn't want to stay in the US during the pandemic. None of us knew what was going on. I knew my family was in India. My father and mother were here. They were working on this robotics project. The state of affairs of being a doctor in the US had changed drastically from when my parents were, practicing physicians. But this is sort of what my reality was, feeling like and this is Chicago, like a big city. It's supposed to be very liberal and, intelligent. So then pandemic happened. I'd gotten married. And we had big plans for our wedding. So this is a funny story. So I was born in Vancouver. Mom, dad, we were all visiting. His youngest sister was out there because when I was a child growing up, my dad, sponsored his youngest sister, my auntie Kalpana, to come to take care of me. And she was also a nurse. And she's the aunt who helped raise me. She says, I used to change your diapers and all these things, right? And so my dream was to get married in Vancouver. There's this mountain there called Grouse Mountain where my dad used to take us when we were kids to the top of this mountain. You go on this, it's like a cable car that takes you to the top. And so we had everything worked out, like the venue, the cake, the flowers. I found a non-denominational, minister to get us married who could speak spiritually, and everything was organized. And then the pandemic came. So I always joke with my parents. I said the only good thing that came out of the pandemic is you guys saved thousands of dollars on this wedding that never happened. So my wife and I actually, because now we had decided that we wanted to come to India. We weren't married yet. All the government offices were closed. So even getting a marriage license was challenging. So finally we were able to come to India, we had to get married. They weren't letting people who didn't have visas, they weren't issuing visas, right, during the pandemic. And so finally we got the interview, we got married. My uncle Moti, who owns a bank in Chicago, he helped me pull some strings with the consulate general, from the Indian embassy, to get her a visa. We got a visa. We flew in the pandemic to Visakhapatnam in Andhra, and this was in October of 2020. And so this is how we got to India. And I remember one thing that was very interesting. So now I'm coming from medicine, and Dad's like, okay, so you're going to be working in an engineering project, and me being in this arrogant doctor, right? I said, yeah, it'll be easy compared to medicine, So he's like, okay, well, and my wife and I were on our honeymoon because during the pandemic, we rented some cabin in the forest in Washington State. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll log on to one of these Zoom meetings, So I log on, and there's like 15 of them sitting around a table, and they're talking about their Mantra 1, this version 1 of our robotic system. And I'm listening to them. And then all of a sudden, I asked my wife, I was like, can you give me a piece of paper and a pen? She said, sure. So, and I start writing words down that I've never heard before. And I'm writing these words down. And then I realized that about 5 minutes of listening to him, I was like, oh, no, what have I signed up for again? Like, I've just become a doctor. I was doing surgery, and now I'm starting all over again on something.
Back to the drawing board
Yeah,
again.
and he's made me the president of this company and the chief operating officer of an engineering project. Luckily, I'm so grateful of the team that I met when I finally came to India. So they took the time. I mean, even before coming to India, I immediately on Amazon downloaded books on mechatronics engineering, and mechanical engineering, and tried to at least so I could learn my ABCs of what I'm getting into when they're doing. It's like I'm learning the ABCs and they're doing Vedic recitation of mantras. It's very complex, right? So now I come to India. And luckily, the team was very willing to work with me. And most of the time, I was just observing and like a fly on the wall, just listening, writing down, self-study.
Right.
And I grew with the team, and the team became like my family. I'm around them all the time. We worked all through the pandemic because we were considered essential services. So by that time, we had shifted from Visakhapatnam to Delhi. And the reason why that happened was, so we were originally doing our clinical trials with the Mantra 1 at Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute with Dr. Sudhir Rawal and his team. And we did 18 cases and 14 patients. See, being a cancer center, there are no easy cases there.
Right.
And normally when you're doing a clinical trial, you pick very easy cases.
Yes.
I think the first case they did was a cholecystectomy and a hysterectomy in the same patients through the same ports. And then after that, the cases just got more difficult.
Right.
And although Dr. Rawal and his team, you could give them anything and they'll make it work because they're all excellent.
Yes.
But our goal was to be able to democratize and make this technology available, for the masses, so that ultimately more doctors could get trained on it. They would have access because, like we were talking earlier, is like if you had previous training in surgical robotics, you didn't have access to the system.
Yes.
Right. So now, how to become excellent? There's a story of, there's one, I won't name the university, but it's a teaching hospital in UP where many people graduate from, and they go out, to all parts of India and the world. But they have one robotic system, with the current, competitor to us. And they have 7 departments. So that means that in 1 month, that each department gets 4 days
Right.
on the system. So now imagine all these surgeons who, they're all good robotic surgeons, but none of them can become excellent. Why?
Right.
Because of the volume,
Yes.
and they don't have enough practice. So, seeing why we were doing what we were doing, and I don't know if he told you the story about what changed him from being a robotic heart surgeon, to getting into technology development. He had a 20-year-old patient who came to visit him. The brother had brought her in. She had a condition called atrial septal defect, which is a congenital condition that means that there's a small hole between the upper chambers of the heart. She was a perfect candidate for robotics. They could easily do 3 small holes through the right ribs. No one would ever notice. The brother said that if she has a huge sternotomy scar, that's where you split the sternum, in the front of her chest, chances of her getting married would be very challenging.
Yes.
He offered to do it for free. Hospital wanted to charge, insisted that they pay. And the cost of the surgery at that time was it's like 4 lakhs. And for most people around the world, even wealthy people within the country, you can justify that. But for the average person,
It's too much.
400,000 rupees is like $400,000.
Yeah.
It might as well have been.
Yeah.
And then he never heard from them. And I think that was the point where he decided that, something must be done. And if no one had done it, then he had to do it. And that's when his journey started. And then we all kind of came there, it's like an opposite river. Like many rivers, a river will break into different, tributaries and smaller streams. Well, this project, how it started is that he had this big dream, big vision. He started, and just as the river was, becoming smaller and smaller, then streams would just pop up and then join the river. And then it would become bigger again. Right. This is sort of the ebb and flow of SS Innovations, from its inception until where we are today. And it was a lot of struggle, and I think I'll stop talking.
So that's something very interesting. So if you look back at your life from today where you are, probably everything would make sense. So everything that you experienced, you started with anthropology, which is the study of the man and his habitat and his language, to heading a company which is spearheading indigenously made robots. So but I'm sure there was a time in between where things were not working out at all. And usually as we are growing up, our parents would always keep criticizing us or keep us on the course. After a point, as we grow up, we tend to do that for our parents. So when there was a time where he left his very successful surgical practice and decided to come into this venture completely, I'm sure there must have been a period of some financial constraints where, as he said, he had to put in all his savings to develop the robot. There was a time where, it was a possibility that he has to go back to his practice to sort things out.
Yeah.
So, what was that time like for the family?
I think for us, I mean, like anything, it's very easy to comment on it now because it's all behind us.
Yeah.
But, without any risk, there is no reward. Okay. And it doesn't matter what you do, whether you want to climb mountains or go surfing or undertake new technologies, invent things, you have to take some risk. Now, ultimately, that risk, within any risk, you will always have collateral damage. Right? And that damage could be very severe. It could just be, things that you have to deal with. I think growing up, we were already used to, when you have someone as a father who's extremely driven and a pioneer and expert in his field, those are all great things, but all those things come at a cost somehow. Yes. They have to.
And I think the family ends up paying that cost more than anybody else.
Yeah, and it's time, but it's also something you grow and get used to, Yes. So either you can and then ultimately then it has a choice. There's this Buddhist saying that always, every time I feel stuck in a corner or I'm upset or, you feel like I wish they could do this or I wish they would think that. There's a saying that, the moment you realize that you cannot control the actions of other people will be one of the most liberating days in your life, right? So similarly with our parents, and I'm sure even them with us. And I think, as you're rightly pointing out, you see, parents take care of the kids. And then I think somewhere in the middle, there's like a little sweet spot where parents and kids are like friends. And then the kids become the parents. Yeah. And the parents become the kids, right?
Yes.
So I think that works unless your parent is a cardiothoracic surgeon. So, for my mom, it's great. She's a family physician, general practice. She still calls me, even when I was in medical school, she was doing locums and she'd call me and she's like, okay, I have this patient. These are her values. It's like, what's your differential? And it was very enjoyable. I'm a student and I'm working with my mom, and so I think, you have to, either you can resent someone for, a dream that they have, or you can accept someone for the dream. But ultimately, that's a choice. And I think that because for him, in the big picture, that it wasn't only for him, right? It's one thing if you say that I'm going to sacrifice all this time just so I can become rich and buy boats and be very selfish.
Right.
I think, the reason why he was doing it was much bigger than him, and we all recognize it.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that it was easier,
yes.
But at least you're able to
yes.
To
it was probably tougher because, when the goal is to touch as many lives as possible and it's not a figure in the bank, so that goal will keep on multiplying. So you'll never actually reach it.
Yes.
Because you want to, reach to as many people as you want. So coming back to, destiny kind of drove you back to patient care. Initially, you getting back into medicine. Then somehow, making that switch or that pivot from a doctor who's able to, take care of only so many lives. How many patients can you see in a day? How many patients can you operate in a day? But probably sitting now where you are able to maybe make a much bigger difference.
Yeah, I felt that, when I was in Chicago, and that was sort of when he offered me, that I could really use your help. First of all, that was a big thing because, my father is a the world pioneer in robotic cardiac surgery, very seldom would ask for my help. More of the time I would offer it. Give what's it called, unsolicited advice. But he asked me, he's like, I think and there's what we're doing is a good thing, and you're kind of old to be doing if you want to go into trauma and this and that. Like, in fact, I mean, when I started medical school, I was much older than others. My first day of my first year anatomy, I walked into the classroom, and all the Indian, Pakistani, Nigerian students, they all stood up immediately thinking I was the professor, So I already knew I was late in the game, right? Although I enjoyed it. Medicine for me was really, it filled in a lot of the gaps. Like, one, there was always this question in my mind that, am I smart enough to be a doctor? It's always easier to write something off and it's like, no, it's not for me.
Yeah.
But the human body fascinates me. It's, my study and pursuits in yoga and spirituality, in, sports and fitness, it all culminates within the human body, which can all be encompassed within medicine. Yes. And even within medicine, there are galaxies of things to explore, right? From the mind to the body to subtleties of our existence and how we operate. But I was in Chicago. Now I'm a doctor. I answered that question. Yes, I can do it. Yes. Now what do I want to do with it? So he called and said, I was like, you can help a lot of people. So then I started thinking, I was like, yes, I could either, now there's a fork in the road. I can go this way to the left and, just, become a trauma physician, seeing one patient at a time, helping, healing one patient at a time. Or I could become part of a team where I don't know what I will contribute. I know I have something to contribute. I don't know what it is. I didn't know what it was at the time. Then I come to India, against all odds and adversity during this pandemic, to figure out how will I contribute. And not only how will I contribute, but how will I lead? Because the position he'd given me was in a position of leadership. Yes. So now how to navigate this and figure out this for myself. I think due to the team that I had, or that I'm fortunate to be with, and they actually led me into what I'm doing today. It helped me realize that, having made this decision, I can help thousands, potentially millions. Right. And we have a saying in medicine, it's see one, do one, teach one, right? So now if I'm helping to create something where I'm accelerating, advancing, medicine in India, and trust me, there are no shortage of amazing doctors who are Indian globally. Right. Even in the US, in my hospital where I was, 70% of everyone who works there, they're from India. Right. In fact, when we were taking exams in the US, and all med students in the US will tell you this, they would always find the day, and it was very critical to have this information, when all the Indians and Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Nigerians, all the basically immigrants, we'd find out the day that they were taking their boards, right? And then we would schedule our exam on another day because they would score so high on their exams that there would be no curve, right? There's zero curve. The average score is like 97, 98%. On the days that we took it, the average score was like 72, 73%. So what I'm saying is that India has a huge opportunity, right, to become, not only to have access to robotic technology, but, to become a global leader in surgical robotics. One, due to the population, the quality of the physicians, the being completely involved in patient care, excellent clinicians. I think is part of the training, which I can't speak of because I've never trained here. And now having the opportunity of the latest technologies, right, a way to disseminate it, a way to democratize their own skill set, and then who ultimately benefits from everything I just listed? The patients. Yes. Right? If you can make it affordable, accessible, right, and available, the only person who ultimately benefits is the patient. So, yes, I could see one patient at a time, and I probably live a very boring life in the US with no masala. Or come back to India, right, and work on this in a place where I already loved. I already had my own reasons for falling in love with India, from my first day crying in Banaras to a child dying in my arms to saving my friend from malaria to riding my motorbike to in the Himalayas. And the one thing I will say, and oftentimes I get asked well, you're an NRI, what are you doing back in India? Very few NRIs return back to India. They get comfortable, you see in America and everything, yes, there are nice things. Mm-hmm. The only thing, I miss three things about America. I miss the beauty of like national parks. Mm-hmm. I miss my friends. And I miss, the variety of food. Okay. But then I came back to Delhi, and now we have that. Yeah. Now I have good friends, right? And now I have the opportunity to see so many parts of this country as we're launching surgical programs. So now It's not just selfishly, sightseeing and touring. Yes. I'm actually seeing the country now with a purpose.
With new eyes.
Yeah, with new eyes.
Great. So that was some journey to listen to, and I'm sure it must have been an amazing life to live. So we now come back to what you are spearheading this operation. You get to visit a lot of parts in the country, and there is something different about SS Innovations, which I perceived as a doctor from outside. I feel every company is like a person. So they have certain inherent characteristics, and what I saw about your company, which probably is the differentiating factor, is in the why, is into why you are into this. And the why is probably to make it affordable, accessible, and available to everybody. To that end, what happens is you are not targeting just very big corporate hospitals or, metros, but I've seen your installations in smaller cities where nobody can even imagine that a robot can be put in. I've seen these installations in smaller so-called nursing homes. So that is what differentiates your company from the rest. But does it also make it difficult? Because this is probably the path which is not taken by most of the medical device or the industry in general. So does it make it more difficult? Does it make it more challenging and exciting? So what has been your, experience from the other side, spearheading this operation?
I think from the traditional point of view, even from a business point of view, yes, it might be that it's more difficult. See, but I think our company vision right from the beginning, right, was to make gold standard healthcare available for all, because it's not only the rich economies and wealthy individuals that should have access to this. Equal healthcare, gold standard care should be a human right for all, regardless of one's socioeconomic. And if we, following the examples you had mentioned, if we were only to stick to the large metro areas, corporate chain hospitals, then we fall back into the problem that we're trying to solve in the first place.
Exactly.
Right? Yes. And if you think about it, even in the United States, right, with regards to robotic surgery, there's only 30% penetration today across the entire country, which means that 70% of people living in most likely 70% of smaller communities, rural areas, they still have to travel. And when one travels, there's a huge socioeconomic, cost and impact. So it's not only the patient, it's the family. Then they have to stay in a hotel, they have to eat in restaurants. Everyone's taking time off of work, unless you're fortunate enough to work from your laptop. And only because they don't have access, just like in India. So I think one of the most, and it's not, I think one of the more challenging things is trying to figure out how to make it work, not only from their side, but also financially and us. And we're very flexible. You see, ultimately our goal is to launch as many clinical programs
as possible
and democratize as many surgeons as we can throughout the country, so that, it's like they say in the Bible, right? You say, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat forever, right? So what we're doing is we're giving these, fishes, to these surgeons, and then teaching.
Yeah.
Right? And then they're helping so many people.
Okay.
And I think that is ultimately the goal. Right now, you see, from a business point of view, yes, it's probably a horrible model to follow. And this is probably why these other MNCs are not doing it. But see, we're also very different than a lot of these other large, well-established multinational corporations where they have a lot of layers of bureaucracy. They can always write things off, even if their robotic project fails. For us, this is our life.
Yes.
And as an organization, we're very flat. We have very little bureaucracy. As I said in one of their previously recorded videos, we're a company that's started by doctors, run by doctors. All the feedback we get are from end users, also doctors. All the new things we make are from doctors. Our entire team here, they're all engineers who are also scientists.
Right.
And so we have this ethos that we want to remain a science company. We don't want to, devolve into just a sales company.
Yes.
If you see, and it's like, if you focus on the work, you do good work, all things will follow. If you focus on the money, then you're compromising the work. It's like they say in Gita.
Yes.
Like you don't think on the result.
Yes.
You focus on the task at hand.
Right.
So similarly, this is sort of what we want to do. And yes, if it's meant to be, there's a million reasons why we should not exist today. Somehow things fell into place. There were months where we had no idea how we would keep the doors open.
Right.
We struggled financially, fundraising. India, as brilliant scientists and doctors as they make, when it comes to investment in sophisticated medical devices, we're still learning.
Yes.
Right? We're not there yet, but it's growing. India, being one of the fastest growing economies, if not the fastest growing economy in the world, they invest a lot of money in healthcare and education, consumer goods, tech. It's just medical device that, we're not there yet.
Yes.
70 to 80% of all of our advanced medical devices, they come from outside.
Yes.
And they come with high duty costs, very low returns. We're the only robotic company in the country that has zero customs duty because we're made indigenously.
Right.
No one thought it could ever be done in India. So this is another thing, right? This is a really nice thing to see, is that when we meet these other doctors and the look of pride, in their eyes, saying that this has been made, in India. The main, previous companies, they thought it could never be accomplished in India. They never filed a single patent in the country. And although we made something extremely very original, we didn't copy anything. But just to think that, why would you not, India's 1/5 of the world's population, right? You should probably file a patent in that country, and see, when we meet people, they're very proud that we've done it. We've made it in India. I think that we're sticking to our core ethics. We're sticking to our values of trying to democratize, help as many people as we can. And, even from our team, through the ups and downs of our company and struggle, like we had no idea, 1 month to the next, right? And even got to the point where the entire senior team, including myself, we approached, the CFO and my father saying, just please, you take half of our salaries away. It's enough. It's okay. We're fine. Just to help the company, and we did that for some time, and we're okay now. But you see, this is part of, evolving. And again, without any risk, there's no reward. And we all risk everything being here. If I look at my team, everyone risks, moving to this, ethereal idea of working in a surgical robotics company when none existed in the country.
Right.
And everyone's taken a risk, leaving their homes, leaving, their comfort zone, coming here, learning something new. Very few people who built our robotic system, they have any experience in robotics. Everyone learned on the job. And we've made a world-class machine very quickly. It was like my dad says, when you're poor, you have to work fast. Otherwise, the doors will close and the dream is gone.
Yeah. What do you see as not only the future of SS innovations, but as the future of surgery? So say this is 2045. So where do you see surgery going in the future?
I think, firstly, robotic surgery is kind of where everyone is headed right now. I think if you look at sort of the evolution of surgery, so we all grew up with open surgery, right? Open surgery where you open up the body, surgeon is standing at the bedside. Open surgery is horrible for the patient. It's great for the surgeon. The surgeon sees everything, right? Then there's the evolution to laparoscopic surgery, where now it's better for the patient, horrible for the surgeons,
Yeah.
right? Because it's very awkward, these awkward positions. And you have limitations now that you're imposing on yourself. Suturing becomes challenging. Trying to do what you were doing previously open is very challenging. Then we had the evolution where we are today into surgical robotics, where it's good for the patients and it's good for the surgeon. Now, is it great for both? Probably not, but could it get better? Absolutely.
Yes.
Right? So that's what I'm saying, like a constant evolution. I think when people like us want to work closely with the doctors, constantly evolve, sticking true to, the core scientific method and philosophy, while maintaining the highest standards and adherence to the Hippocratic oath of doing no harm, right? I think, there are boundless places that you can go, right, with time. And I think that's where we're heading. I think that with technology, and one of our big things that we're really big on right now is how to improve on our way that we train, on the way that we practice, on the way that, how to improve our outcomes, to guarantee. Because like when you're studying, traditionally everyone, they go through medical school, then residency or PG, then they'll do like fellowship, and then they finally will specialize, right? This is a very protracted, long process. One thing that we're really trying to have happen here in India is that, to initiate robotic training as part of the postgraduate curriculum. And so India has the highest number of medical colleges globally, right? And even if you could penetrate 1/10 or
some of them, yes.
Then now students will have access. They'll come out as trained robotic surgeons,
Right.
trained robotic teams. Ultimately it's better for the patients. Now, if you can make it affordable and give people access, then provide, and to answer what you pointed out previously, rightly so, in these tier 2 and tier 3 cities, patients don't have to travel. They have access to everything they need back at home. And then also a lot of the surgeons who go off and they train in these larger metro areas, they have incentive to return to their communities.
To their communities.
Yeah, oftentimes when surgeons, they get used to having everything like the latest CT or MRI or robotic system, and then when it's really hard for them to
go back to their communities,
right?
Yes.
And then they're compromising.
Right.
So I think what I see is that we want to utilize technology. So now currently we've already established and enabled teleproctoring. And then, so the way that we look at it is kind of like when we launch a program. So we go there physically. I'll divide the team into surgeons, nurses, and the support staff and the OT. And then we train all of them individually. And then we do dry runs, let them learn how to use the machine, introduce troubleshooting scenarios, introduce errors that they have to fix. Then we do dry runs of setting up for different types of procedures. Then following that, we'll have proctors come. They will guide through the initial cases. And then our idea is that to utilize technology, so rather than flying people here and there, use the technology to your advantage. So, like when you're doing a case, all a proctor does is tell you that you should do this, cut here, do this, do that. The goal of the proctor is not to do the surgery for you. Otherwise, you'll never learn, right? So then, let's say you're proctoring and now you get into some difficulty. So just as when we train in medicine, especially in surgery, that once you get into a difficult situation, then someone with more experience can then take over.
Yes.
So for us, this is what telesurgery should be. Telesurgery is not like a gimmick or parlor trick. It's very challenging and impressive, don't get me wrong. And there's a lot of responsibility and ethical criteria that has to come into consideration. But if you can perfect it, then you think that, I can sit here in Delhi, I can proctor a person in Jalandhar, for example, in one case, and then simultaneously or within like an hour, I could be on the other side of the country in Kolkata, proctoring another case. And should that person, encounter a difficulty, then they have the confidence that they don't have to give up on the surgery, that someone is looking over their shoulder in their corner who can take over and complete the surgery or complete that step in the surgery and then get them
back on course.
So we want to utilize this. And I think that if this approach and philosophy is inculcated into, the programs, not only where we launch, but all the other people who know what possibilities are there, I think we have a
The
huge
possibilities are
opportunity.
endless because most of us as doctors, we do want to learn new technologies but not take any risks with our patients, because patient safety always comes paramount when you're a doctor.
Yes.
So I think this is a very, very exciting avenue which has opened up. And when we thought of telesurgery, we always thought that there's a star surgeon who is sitting somewhere and is operating patients worldwide and has huge numbers. But your take on it is a totally different take, and I think which is actually going to democratize excellence.
Correct.
Because democratizing excellence doesn't mean that one person is everywhere doing the surgeries. It means that there are several people who all have access to that excellence, because there's somebody standing over their shoulder and helping them in difficult situations, never compromising patient safety.
Exactly. Yes.
In the end, how do you see virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, merge into robotics and improve, or how do you see the future?
So if you think about it, even today, I mean, for me, it's very exciting and very scary. And the only reason I say scary is, my head of my SSI Maya division, Naveen, is looking at me right now. The only reason, because whenever I put them on, it's so immersive and it's so
Real.
otherworldly.
Yeah.
And there's limitless possibilities. To me, that is frightening. Right. And to me, I feel like I'm like one of those old people saying, "Get off my lawn" type of, attitude now. And I'm not that old yet, but I think but as I said, the possibilities are limitless.
Yes.
And I think this is where everything's heading. Because if you think about, robotic surgery as it is today, see even without the robot, what do you need to do surgery? You need eyes and you need arms, right?
Right.
So now, with robotic surgery, you have your eyes and arms except away from you.
Yes.
Right. Now with this whole augmented reality, virtual reality applications, you have everything in one. And just as we operate without think about just how we operate as humans. You need eyes and hands and instruments. Now you go to lab, you're using eyes, but you're using a camera.
Yes.
And you're using instruments that are connected to you.
Yes.
But now they're away from you somewhat.
Yes.
Right? The length of the instrument. Now in robotics, everything is away from you. The camera, right? But it's an extension of you.
Yes.
Now AR, VR integrates everything right here and in this space. And this is actually, one thing that we're experimenting heavily with here, because not only, is it solving this simple requirement of what it takes to teleoperate and conduct surgery, but bring down the cost drastically. You remove all the hardware.
Right.
It's a very radical, way of thinking.
I think it's an amazing shift, because now instead of the screens, the screen has become you. So your eyes are the screen. So wherever you turn, you see the experience. Yeah. And I think that is also transformative, because you can also have another person who is not in the room share the same reality as you are.
Sure.
So while you are in laparoscopic surgery, your assistants will share the screen. You might relay it to somebody.
Sure.
But it will not be exactly what you're experiencing.
Sure.
As a surgeon. So I think that is what is exciting, and also a little scary, because there are layers which can be added to it which are not real. But as we say in Indian tradition, the way to get out of Maya is through the mantra. So I'm sure the inventors of Mantra, who have also made Maya, the software which is integrating augmented and mixed reality, will find a way to integrate it beautifully, so that it can, one, augment reality, so that the tissue differentiation, the differentiation between structures. And also the beauty is that in robotics, the robot is recording every step. So now the robot knows that this is the step where most of the surgeons or this particular surgeon falters. And they are able to learn that and proctor the surgeon themselves. That this is the step and this is the ureter right here, and this is the step where you have to exercise caution.
You're talking about using volumes of AI and machine learning.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, as you rightly pointed out, like it's a little unnerving. So this augmented reality, and I don't think it's unnerving because it's new. I think it's unnerving to me because there's so many possibilities that we don't even know about yet. Right? Is even in surgical robotics, or laparoscopy, when it first came out, all the open surgeons were screaming heresy. And
absolutely. But the thing, the speed in robotics is going to be way faster.
Yes.
than it was in laparoscopy. In laparoscopy, it took us decades. In robotics, it probably took years. But I think once AR and VR comes in, it's probably going to be a matter of months before the next new thing comes
And
in.
I think one thing that's amazing with AR VR is being able to, so now you integrate everything into one. So you have obviously actual conduct of surgery, vision, movement, you have diagnostics,
Right.
you have
So you can have layers
predictability.
of patient diagnostic
many
images.
things.
Everything could be overlapped. So I think yes, the future really looks very, very promising. So on that note, in the end, what would your advice be to a budding surgeon or a budding doctor? Because I'm sure the rules have changed since we did our medicine. So what do you think the doctors of today should be like?
I think the doctors of today should first and foremost never forget why they wanted to become doctors in the first place. Don't go through what I went through. I don't think your parents have time or your families would have the patience
So
for
don't
this.
do what I did.
Don't
do what I say.
do what I say, not what I do. No, I think that you really, I think the doctors that come out of India are like, they're in a league unto themselves. And it's something that you all should be very proud of. I know I'm very jealous of. And I think that, one of our goals here as a company, that yes, we are technically, an engineering company. So it's a surgical idea, but at the end of the day, it's an engineering project.
Right.
One thing we wanted to hope that we could do would be to inspire others, that if we can do it, think about what's possible with what tools you have today.
Right.
Now with AR, VR, now you'll have robotics at your doorstep in the country.
Right.
Work with us to make it better. How could you make it better? I challenge all of you, please. Because ultimately, who benefits? The patients.
Correct.
Competition, everyone is afraid of competition. Competition is a great thing because it keeps everyone on their toes. It makes people, it gives them the hunger, right, to aspire for more. The worst place you can be in life, especially as a scientist or someone who wants to create things, is comfortable and complacent, right? So don't be comfortable, don't be complacent. If you can think it, you can do it. We are proof, and I'm sure you could do much better, than us. And, I encourage all of you to, if you're ever in Gurgaon, especially if you're an engineer or budding doctor or current doctor, please visit us, see what we've been able to do in the country. And, I invite all of you to contribute, and how big or small, just as I could have gone this way or that way, and however big or small I could contribute.
Right.
Now I've known that I've done something, hopefully would help someone aside from myself.
Absolutely. Amazing. That was really probably one of the most stimulating and wonderful conversations that I've had in my life.
Oh.
And I hope all of you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you have questions or comments, to write to us. Listen to this, share this with as many people as possible, so that this message of Make in India, of innovation, of starting with why, reaches as many people as possible. Thank you so much.